Hola a todos. Hi everyone. This is Fantasy Island, Decolonial Futures and Puerto Rican Response. My name is Shey Rivera, they, them, she, her pronouns, and I'm an artist. I have to apologize that I'm not there with you in person, but thank you so much for sharing space. The other artist that was meant to present work for this to be a hands-on session won't be able to join us, but we're taking this opportunity to present the work of two very dear artists who have been creating work in response to the humanitarian crisis in Puerto Rico. Joe Cosme and Joel Rivera. They're both illustrators, queer artists, and they'll share their work with you today. I want to have a big thank you, want to give a big thank you to Sasha Constanza Shaw and to the Allied Media Conference for giving us this opportunity to present on the work of Puerto Rican artists. So I want to share with you a project that I started about a year ago called Fantasy Island. When I started this project in Providence, Rhode Island, it was in response to the passing of the Promesa Act, the fiscal oversight board that is making decisions over the government and the fiscal crisis in Puerto Rico. Many of us in the diaspora were in contact with our friends and families in the island, and we were thinking, how could we respond and create opportunities for people to learn about what was going on and truly be aware and activate spaces and mobilize people. So this project came out of that desire in a sense of being overwhelmed and not being sure what to do. I realized that as an artist, I could just contribute to create space to have dialogue and conversation. So Fantasy Island is an installation, a performance, and an experience that explores tourism, its consumer nature, and the disconnect that the U.S. has, most of the U.S. has, in relationship to Puerto Rico. Most people, it was a criticism around how most people see Puerto Rico as a fantasy island, an escape tourism spot, and it's very disconnected to the realities that people face on a day-to-day, especially amidst the fiscal crisis. And then we saw the devastation of Maria, which only lifted the veil, to quote many other artists and activists, on what was actually going on in the island and has been for a long time as a colonial territory. So Fantasy Island, I created a body of work of animated GIFs that came out of looking through numerous multi-million-dollar properties that were being sold in Puerto Rico amidst this fiscal crisis. And I created animated GIF collages to showcase just how absurd this is and how disconnected folks are from reality. So really looking into this, I liked the idea of the vaporwave movement online. This idea behind vaporwave that talks about an obsolete future, a future that was idealized in the 80s and 90s, but is now obsolete. And I felt like that was a really great way to start talking about what Puerto Rico is. After a long time of maybe about 3 iterations of this piece as a performance, a pop-up, and an installation, and a body of digital work, there were 3 iterations of space that happened. But at that point, I started thinking, well, you know, it's important to talk about the deficit and important to talk about the challenges, but also we should be carving space to start envisioning what future we want for ourselves. A while back, there was this controversy around a bunch of people who moved to San Juan, and they were exploring ways to activate the Bitcoin economy, and they were buying property in San Juan. And a lot of our friends as well and family members had fears of just public services being privatized, well, continue to be privatized. And what does that mean when external forces continue to take over the resources and spaces in Puerto Rico, and we feel like we're not allowed or encounter barriers in taking ownership of facilitating our own futures. So this was an attempt for us to talk about what was going on back home, to connect with people that were already doing work, both activists and artists and journalists, being a part of the connection between the diaspora and the island that had activated in support of the mobilization to get the island and the communities back up. To speak a little bit more about Fantasy Island, this, if you can envision it, is a space, so it's a grid, a black and white grid, full room covered with this grid, to get a sense of displacement. and being dizzy and not knowing where you are. You enter it and it becomes a real estate office. So there's the grid, a whole space with the grid, multiple palm trees, multiple sculptures, and digital media projected in multiple monitors, and a large monitor that shows the sky. And in the middle of this room is a real estate office with a performance by a dear friend and documentary journalist, Huáscar Robles, and his piece he presented as a real estate agent and shared a story about traveling to Santurce with the intention to gentrify Puerto Rico, but then eventually reclaimed his roots and decided that he understood what he was doing and it was up to him to change that perspective and uplift the community there. So this was a performance crafted by him. We collaborated in the piece together, but the idea was to give people this experience of being in this real estate office, disconnected from everywhere, and with this person trying to sell you property in Puerto Rico. Every single person that entered the room, we would have conversations right after that performance. After his performance, we would do presentations of poetry and music. We had panel discussions and we had community forums. And every single person that stepped foot in this space, we talked about the island, what was going on, we shared information, and we also connected with other folks. One of the spaces, we presented this in Providence, Rhode Island, but also presented it at Loisaida Art Center in New York on the Lower East Side. That's a nonprofit and cultural center that's been around since the 70s in a heavily gentrified area. They've been Puerto Rican community members who have planted the flag and kept up their work there. Shout out to them, they do amazing work. We were there for 2 months holding space for people when the hurricane hit and having community conversations. We realized, and I realized, that the work took on a much deeper meaning in just holding space for people and making sure that the right information was distributed and we can have space for conversation to process the trauma of not knowing what our family members were going through in the island. And then at the same time making sure people would make connections with folks, like who was connecting to who. Like, did you find out where your uncle was? Did you find out about your parents? Did you find out about your cousins? Are people bringing them back to, are people bringing them to the US? What was going on? It was really important to connect with people and also to share the right info. I do want to flag and highlight the work of Agitarte. They're an activist group that many of us have been engaged with, and elevate their work and have their work support and inform ours. They're a group that I encourage you all to check out. They created all these practices and policies around organizing in support of Puerto Rico. Many of us were also trying to dissuade folks from engaging in fundraising without knowing who they were connected to, or we were trying to share who they should support in our perspective, more of the grassroots organizations or small some family circles that could support people instead of the larger organizations that weren't really supporting the communities back on the island. So yeah, this was a really special project. It grew and it became something much more meaningful to me personally, to the artists that I collaborate with, and I just look forward often to try to claim space and have these conversations with folks. And yeah, I'm excited to work with multiple artists to make this conversation much more relevant and elevate it. One of the pop-up iterations was Queer Afro-Indigenous Futures, and the collaboration was between Andrea Perez, a printmaker here in Newport, Rhode Island. I'm based in Providence, Rhode Island currently. I've been here for 8 years. So I met with Andrea, another queer artist, exceptional work, and also an artist that is local to Rhode Island, half native Narragansett and half Black American. Their name is Kay Funlimayo Alero, and their body of work was around Afrofuturism. So between the three of us, our work was around spirituality, futures, but also digging out our roots and rethinking how do we use the tools we have and how do we decolonize our practices as artists by reclaiming our cultures, but also breaking that box of culture and expanding it into what we want to see in the future. I reconnected with Joe Cosme and Joel Rivera. We've been friends for many, many years. Joel studied in the University of Puerto Rico. He is an illustrator, a graphic designer, and a writer. And Joe Cosme studied in the Escuela de Artes Plásticas in San Juan. They're a photographer and mixed media artist. And I've been continuing to follow their work for a while and see how they responded to the fiscal crisis and the humanitarian crisis in Puerto Rico in such a powerful way. So I'm excited to open this space for us to hear more about their work. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and we're looking forward to your questions and comments afterwards.